Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to just share some things with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I was told I didn't need to, but I just put a few slides together just to guide this talk. And so really, I just want to start off with, what is resilience and what does sleep have to do with resilience, right? And really, when you think about the definition of resilience, there are a few things that come to mind. One of them is, the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. And, show of hands of who's experienced some challenging times over the last few years, right? Even over the course of our lives, right? And so I think that's something that just really resonates. Like, this is a skill, or this is a character we need to be able to bounce back and to be able to, move forward. And it turns out, one of the things I say is that sleep is a superpower. It turns out that sleep is one of those hidden superpowers that actually allows us to build resilience in whatever it is we're trying to achieve, whether it is as entrepreneurs, as humans, as parents, whatever that role is. I can tell you that that's one really, low-hanging fruit that seems very basic, but once you're able to discover that and harness it, does take you to the next level. And so, by way of full disclosure, one of the things I just wanted to share right here, what I'm going to be sharing is information only, right? We all deserve our own physicians. Well, I'm a physician. I'm not your physician. So I'll be sharing some things. If there's any concern about a medical issue you have, then, definitely speak with your physician, who will then guide you and help you get the care you need. And, even though I'm a sleep specialist, I wouldn't say sleep was always easy for me. And I think some of the decisions I made regarding this career and my business came from the experiences I had struggling with sleep myself. So as a trainee in medical school, sleep was just, it was not a thing, right? It was busy. It was the grind. It was holding this like sleep deprivation as a narrative. And so I was exhausted and I struggled a lot, and I had, anxiety and just a whole lot of stress that I realized came from a place of not sleeping. And so being able to create boundaries, being able to prioritize my sleep really resulted in me being very successful and productive. And taking that, steps further to help other people has become my real true passion. And really, when we talk about sleep, there are many things that sleep does. And one of the things I just want us to realize is sleep is a critical pillar of health. It's not necessarily something we hear about frequently, right? We hear about nutrition and, fitness and things like that, but we don't really pay that much attention to sleep as a pillar of health. More recently, it's emerging. People are discovering how important sleep is. And so that is good, but we're still not there yet. And so I want us to see it not just as something we do by the side, but an essential way for us to live and to thrive. And, this is not something that, this is definitely something that has caught the eye of the CDC. And, a few years ago, they declared that insufficient sleep is a public health epidemic. And when we look even at the statistics, it's studies have shown that up to 37% of 20 to 39-year-olds don't get enough sleep. And then up to 40%, so almost half of 40 to 59-year-olds have short sleep. And then about 35% or so of adults sleep less than 7 hours in a 24 hours period. And do you know that beyond that, it's even the consequences? So just one statistic was around the number of deaths that actually occur in hospitals due to medical errors, which have been connected to sleep deprivation. It's 100,000 deaths. And this is not even data that, talks about like drowsy driving, the impact of that. That's several thousand as well from drowsy driving, the consequences from that. And, I think I have a slide here that I'll share even on productivity, especially if you're either an employee or you're an employer. Productivity is significantly affected by sleep. And again, I'm a physician. So when it comes to the medical world, this is something that we have taken on, and a lot of strategies, a lot of rules, and a lot of mandates have been made to make sure that people are prioritizing sleep. And so this saying was by Sidney Zion, who was the father of Libby Zion. This was several years ago. And he said, you don't need kindergarten to know that a doctor or a resident that works a 36-hour shift is in no condition to make any kind of judgment call. And while I may not necessarily be speaking directly to physicians directly in this group, think about the critical decisions you have to make as well, and how much that can impact your sleep. The sad thing that happened with Libby Zion was that she did pass away. She had presented to the hospital. She had some symptoms, and then she received a medication, which she should not have received because she was on another medication. And so they interacted, and it led to her demise. And what they found out was that those that were taking care of her they had been working for so many hours. So the decision they made, they probably should have stopped and said, wait, what medication is she on? What medication can she receive because she's on this medication? Could there potentially be an interaction? But not really being able to make those very critical decisions cost her life. And since then, a good thing came out of it. Now, the way the body, it's called the ACGME, which is a body that regulates duty hours for trainees, for residents in hospitals. They've insisted a limit to the number of hours that people can stay awake in terms of working shifts. And I think that's made a huge change, a huge difference. Something that I just put in here because I realize that, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a professional, this is one thing we battle with a lot. And that's that mind racing. That mind racing is a big one that gets in our way of sleep. And, one of the things that Sean Combs said was, he said, my mind is always racing, always going and always working. It's a gift and a curse. And I don't know how many of you probably, go into the shower with one idea and come out with 100, or you get into bed and all of a sudden, you start to come up with all these incredible creative ideas, especially if you are, again, someone who either is in the industry or things like that. And so this really does impact our sleep significantly. But one thing I want you to know is you are not alone. And, again, not to drive this point on, one of the things I always say is sleep is not a luxury. Sleep is not just something you do as part of self-care. Sleep is a biological requirement. It's as important as water, as food, as air. And it turns out it takes up about 20 to 40% of our lives. So if you think about it, if you take this one thing that impacts a third of your life, if you are able to prioritize it, imagine the impact that it has on the remaining 2/3 of your life, of your day, right? So this is something that we do need to start to learn to prioritize. The one thing we do know is that sleep is, while it's so critical, it is driven by so many factors. Again, mental health is one of when we think about sleep, mental health is a big one. Physical health, in terms of even just building resiliency, whether it is mental, whether it is physical, whether it is emotional, sleep plays a critical role. When it comes to our learning, when it comes to cognition, we focus a lot on letting our kids get enough sleep. But even as adults, our ability to learn, our ability to consolidate the things we learn is impacted by the kind of sleep we get. And then also when it comes to personal safety, right? You as an individual don't want to share the road with a driver that's sleepy, right? You don't want to share a road with a driver that's sleepy. So you don't want to be that sleepy driver as well. And so even when it comes to personal safety and how we serve and make sure that we keep our community safe, sleep is very fundamental. Now, on the flip side, when we don't get enough sleep, there's so many things that can happen. Our executive function, our ability to make critical decisions, the likelihood of making errors, no matter what that is, inattention, impulsivity, all that can come out from not getting enough sleep. And I always allude to this, imagine that 2-year-old, right? When you're in the grocery store who is throwing the biggest tantrum because they missed their nap period and now they're so exhausted. And you see the parent making excuses for them and things like that. So sleep is like that. As adults, we feel like that 2-year-old who didn't get enough sleep or even within a very short period of time. So your mood, the ability to regulate emotions, all those things are affected by our sleep. There is increased risk of anxiety and depression, and unfortunately, increased risk of suicide that has been associated with not getting enough sleep. And even when it comes to our physical health, our general health, there's an increased risk of heart disease, right? Of heart attacks, of hypertension, of abnormal heart rhythms, of stroke when we don't get enough sleep. Our metabolism is changed such that the way our bodies is able to regulate glucose can be affected. And so that puts us at risk for diabetes, it puts us at risk for obesity, and so many health consequences that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, we have this incredible tool that could help with that. And then our immune system is shot when we don't sleep. So one of the things that studies have shown is that the ability to actually fight infections and respond actually to vaccinations and things like that is affected by sleep. There's studies that have shown increased risk of certain cancers when we don't sleep well. Your pain threshold changes, human performance, because imagine that your executive function is off, your mood is off, and you just don't feel quite right. Of course, human performance will be impacted as well. There's a higher rate of burnout when we don't get enough sleep, and mortality. You do have a higher likelihood of a shorter life when you don't sleep. So this is not to scare anyone, but just to help us to see that this is not just something we do passively because we can't keep going because we're sleepy. This is essentially fundamental to life. Again, I talked about resilience, and what resilience is it? Again, that capacity to withstand or recover quickly from circumstances, right? It's that toughness. And it's so important for us to build resilience, to be able to address and to be able to face challenges that we might experience, right? Another definition talks about the fact that it's the ability of a substance to sort of spring back to shape, right? We're not expected to be, tough all the time. We're not expected to kind of have that macho sort of superhero complex, right? But the ability to bounce back from whatever adversity we're facing is a strong and very important characteristic to have. And they've done studies looking at sleep and resilience. A lot of the studies that have been done have been looking at military service members. And so what they did on one study was they looked at those with insomnia, and they found that those who had insomnia, those that were in the military, the service members, they found that those with insomnia were less resilient to those who did not have insomnia. And what they also found was that the insomnia, which is, the difficulties with sleep they had, was associated with worse health, was associated with lost work days. It was associated with a lesser likelihood of deployment. And also there was a greater chance of them being discharged from the armed forces. So again, you can sort of apply this to your own everyday life, the ability to be able to withstand whatever it is, withstand those difficulties can be impacted. I talked about productivity. Again, this is an organization, the OECD is an organization for economic cooperation and development. And what they did was that they sort of had this estimates of just how sleep impacted performance, impacted safety, impacted, productivity. And what they found in the US, for instance, was that there was an estimated cost of 411 billion with a B loss per year with with associated with insufficient sleep. Again, these are estimates, these are sort of models that they built. But again, it lets you see, as you think through your own systems, as you should think through either your business or your employment, how much insufficient sleep leads to either not being able to show up at work, either needing to, have to go to the hospital because you're sick, either needing to just not be productive, and it's taking even longer for you to get work done because you're just not as productive. So again, impacts us on the individual level and even on much larger scales as well. So we talked about why sleep is important, right? We talked about what happens when we don't get enough sleep. Then my question is, why don't we? Why is it such an issue? Why don't we get enough sleep? And why is this such a sleep-deprived nation and generation? And why are we so tired too? And there are several reasons, so many, but here are a few that I think that resonates with a lot of the people I work with. One is that we define ourselves by our productivity, right? You feel almost like there's this narrative of, wait, what? You're sleeping, 8 hours? How is that even possible? And so there's this connotation of you're lazy or you're not as productive when you're sleeping. And again, I've told you now, if you want to boost your productivity, that's one hack that you can get onto real quick. Another thing is sometimes there's a need to work longer hours, right? You need to cover shifts. You may need to pick new shifts. And so because of that, sleep just goes onto the back burner. One other reason is just that stress, anxiety, and just this constant being on and not necessarily being able to shut our minds off impacts our sleep. Sometimes we see rest as a luxury, right? It's that narrative, I'll sleep when I'm dead, you snooze, you lose. Those kind of things impact our sleep significantly. And, and at the end of the day, we're not able to benefit as much as we should, right? And, I'm hearing some 3 hours, 4 hours. It would be interesting to hear how many hours you sleep at night. I would love to hear that too as I'm going through this. Again, no judgment here, but these are things that my hope is that at the end of this talk, we're able to see that sleep is so critical. The other thing about it is we prioritize other priorities because sleep is not something it's so personal, right? So we may have obligations, we may have demands, we may have goals and things like that. And so almost like sleep could seem like it's getting in the way of you being able to achieve those goals. And so at the end of the day, it falls down on our list of priorities. So now we understand this. We understand that sleep is key. We understand that sleep is a superpower. I hope just already you can see that this is something where we're like sitting on a gold mine, so to speak, So how do we then prioritize sleep? How do we then take sleep to improve our resilience, to actually get us going further, longer, and to help us bounce back, whatever we're being challenged or faced with? One thing I would say is it's important, right? I've already established that, because when we're able to be resilient, we have that emotional balance, right? We're able to have better empathy. We're able to have more impulse control. The likelihood of engaging in risky behaviors, right, is affected by sleep. So we're able to engage in less risky behaviors, right? We're able to be more creative, right? And if you're able to have all those things, guess who is benefiting from it? Guess who's more resilient? Us. And so I'm just going to go through a few things that can help us to prioritize sleep and use it as our true superpower to build resilience. And so I'll go into a little bit of detail when it comes to the healthy sleep practices. And that's something that is so fundamental, right? A lot of times it's around, okay, maybe prioritizing it by, putting down your phone at certain times. And yes, I understand that. But I think it's important to take a step back, even before you're doing that, to make sure that you establish that sleep is critical, that sleep is like your appointment. Like sleep is so fundamental for you to get things done. That sleep is like going to see your doctor, your multi-specialty doctor, because you're going to see your heart health is impacted by sleep, your brain health is impacted by sleep, your physical health, your metabolism, right, your mood. So think of it like you're going to like a whole wellness center for 8 hours every night. And so don't miss that appointment. So I think that's just the beginning. Start with that. Start with seeing this as critical, right? And then the other piece is you want to go to bed at a time that works best for your circadian clock, for your circadian rhythm. Because when you go to bed at a time that is misaligned, it's going to cause a lot of frustration and then may cause insomnia. So that's another thing that I think is really important, right? And then you want to avoid drowsy driving, right? So that is really important as well. And then you want to also seek help if you need it. And that's where you always have to realize there is always the motivation. You may have the motivation to get good sleep. You may see that sleep is critical, but do you need that extra bridge to get you to where you're going? And, here is just one story of someone that I worked with who had like no boundaries, right? It was everything. And so she was drowning, but then it turned out, so the issue was, I can't sleep. I just can't sleep. And so really digging deep into, okay, why can't you sleep? What exactly is going on? And when I work in my program, we kind of walk through the entire day, like start from the beginning. And we realized there was just no boundaries. There was no delineation between when she ended and when everything else started, right? And so everything was intruding between kids and work and obligations and community. And oh, by the way, I need to make sure I have this incredible, fitness program and this and that and the other. And we were able to kind of break things into small bites, create those boundaries. And guess what came after? Good sleep. So it's really priority that we set those boundaries. So, of course, if you Google sleep hygiene, you'll find this. But these are some evidence-based tips that I share to create restful sleep. And this is also on my website, restfulsleepmd.com. So you could just grab a copy and print it out and just put it down for everyone, for your family and things like that. And so the first is consistency. Again, it's about sleeping when it's better aligned with your circadian rhythm, but making sure that you're as consistent as possible, because that will cue your body into sleeping at the right time. The next thing is making sure you have a routine, so an activity that's relaxing, that leads you in the direction of the bedroom, right? So either reading a book, having a shower or a bath, doing some mindfulness, having that as your routine consistently. And then the third is E, which is having your environment cool, dark, and noise-free. And I could tell you each and every one of this is a whole talk on its own, right? Because all those things help promote healthy, deep sleep. Then you want to assign your bed for sleep and sex, nothing else. So we shouldn't have our beds as the movie theater or the dining room, right? Or the office space, right? So you want to just sleep in bed because our brains make those associations, and you want the association of sleep and bed to be strong. And then C is tackle technology. Again, that's a whole talk on its own, right? One, for two main reasons, our brains produce melatonin, and then that our brains produce melatonin, and then blue light from our phones will suppress that production, and that impacts our sleep overall. And then the other piece is the notifications. They tend to be so distracting that they create this hyper aroused state for you constantly. And then E is eliminate caffeine, alcohol, and heavy meals close to bedtime. So you really want to avoid those things. Caffeine is a stimulant, right? And so it stays in your body. Half-life is, 6 to 8 hours. And so if you're taking caffeine with dinner, the likelihood that you'll have restful sleep is lower, because it then fragments your deep sleep. So now the question is how many hours of sleep we should get. For adults, really the National Sleep Foundation says 7 to 9 hours. But what I recommend is find what works for you and stick to that. So if you're someone who needs 7 hours and you feel 7 hours is sufficient, I think that is fine. It's important to have that self-reflection of, how do I feel during the day? Am I still tired? Am I sleepy? Am I binging on coffee? Then in that case, maybe you need a little bit more. And so the goal is about 7 to 9 hours, but then it's really tailoring it for what works for you. And then one thing I always encourage is see how well you're doing. Step back and say, okay, I've committed to improving my sleep. How well have I done? How well have I been able to achieve that goal? I've committed to getting maybe 8 hours of sleep every night. I started at 6 hours. How far have I come? I think that's the best way, because we talk about, we track our, so many things. We track our steps, we track our calories, we don't track our sleep as much. I would encourage us to start to do that, not in a way that then creates more anxiety for you, but in a way out of curiosity. How could I do better? And I think that makes a huge difference. I didn't go into anything around medical sleep conditions, but here are a few things you may want to pay attention to and speak to your physician when you've tried and you realize, wait, I still can't sleep well. It might be time to see a sleep expert. It might be time to get a sleep study or things like that. And one thing I always say is, again, sleep is associated, if chronic sleep deprivation is associated with increased mortality, but the one thing that we have to be careful about from this moment is making sure we do not drive sleepy. And so that's really important. There are many ways you can tell, when you're sleepy. You may want to pull over and take a very mini cat nap. You may want to, get out of the car and just go to a gas station and just, try to get that edge off a little, but please don't drive sleepy. It is dangerous and it could potentially be lethal. And so, and if you need help, again, get the help you need. Sleep is critical. Sleep is life-changing. And I hope I have convinced you with this really short talk. And here, stay in touch, connect with me. I would love to hear more. I would love to help if I can. And I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Afolabi-Brown, thank you so very much. Oh my gosh, I was like enthralled the whole time with that. That's so amazing. We do have 2 questions that I wanted to, we have just a couple minutes to address here.
Sure.
The first one was blue light. How harming is blue light?
Great question. So, it's all around us, right? The wavelength of that light is around us. And in terms of our sleep, it is detrimental in the sense of, our brains produce, that melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. It's in our brain. It's a very, very small structure. But what it responds to is some certain environmental cues, right? So one of those environmental cues we also call the Zeitgeber is light. Right? So that regulates with our circadian rhythm, right? So what it does is there's light outside, our brains get that perception right through our eyes, and it shuts off the production of melatonin, okay? When there's darkness, so at night, that our brains register that it's dark, and then we have production of melatonin. So blue light itself suppresses it because our brains don't recognize that it's daylight, like it's natural light or artificial light. And so what that does is it does create melatonin suppression, and then it delays your ability to fall asleep because then it's almost like you're pushing back when melatonin starts being produced.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Last question we have here is any specific suggestions for people with autoimmune diseases when it comes to sleep?
Absolutely. Of course. I mean, the medical things that impact our sleep. I think the key is the important thing is figuring out what is going on with your sleep. So if you are someone who has either pain, that's something that I hear a lot about, right? If you're someone who has a lot of pain, or who has a lot of mood disturbances, so either anxiety, depression, those are things that can impact your sleep. And then there's an entity called psychophysiologic insomnia, which is, again, that mind racing, sometimes, especially when you've gotten into this sort of conditioned arousal where you always have a hard time sleeping. And so the bed becomes like, oh man, we're going to bed again. It's like a lock of the drawer. I don't know whether I'm going to sleep. So actually starting to address those, first of all, dealing with those cognitive issues is important in terms of getting the sleep you want. And then stepping back to see, like, what can I do to address any specific autoimmune disease? So I see this also in, people with chronic pain, people with like fibromyalgia and things like that. If you can prioritize sleep, of course, it helps decrease that pain. It improves your pain threshold and improves your mood overall. But then it's coming down to the nitty-gritty of why. What's the difficulty I'm having with sleep? And usually one of the things I recommend, because a lot of people do have insomnia with autoimmune disease, is the gold standard, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. That is so, so important, because cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is the first line treatment. So we start to deal with what are the important things, what are the things that are driving your sleep issues, right? What are the thoughts? What are behaviors? What are things that we can do to address your sleeping difficulties while we continue to work on the overall arching issue, which is, okay, this autoimmune disorder, how do we get to that underlying issue? So I hope that helps a little bit. So in that situation, it's not just going to be one quick fix. It's going to be quite a number of things that we're going to have to balance.
Understood. Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for your time. You have been amazing, and I'm so excited to have you at the conference and listen to everything you have to present there. It's going to be absolutely incredible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will talk to you again very soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.